carry on with the watercolour theme, and last week I had a look at this one and suggesting that if you wanted to have a go at watercolour, start with something you're not that confident, start with something reasonably simple. So this is one of the more straightforward ones because it kind of goes from light in the background to dark in the foreground. So that's one of the demos I did last week. And I just thought today I'll talk a bit about textures and just any odd things that come to mind, hints, tips, things like that. This one, unfortunately, it's kind of dry with this line here. So what can happen is if it's too wet, the water will just like push all the pigment to the edge, and then you get this kind of harder, darker edge. Now sometimes that can be quite nice, can create quite a nice texture, can be used within the watercolour, and some artists like to use that. But one way, sometimes you can get away with removing that. So what I would do to remove that is really a clean brush and some clean water, and a clean brush and a clean tissue. And what you need to do is just very slightly dampen it, and then you can just sort of soften that edge out and then blot it. The only problem is it tends to leave a bit of a hole. So whereas it was yellow, it's now going to be whiter. So it might be slightly better than it was, but yeah, you can sort of move it. But the problem with going back into watercolours and doing too much of this sort of thing is it can look overworked. It may be that you use it as a technique, like you might want just to highlight maybe a lighter bit through the middle of this tree here. Maybe there's a telegraph pole or something. So if you're doing it in that sort of instance, that probably would work, but sometimes it doesn't really work. So that's just a little bit of something like that. The other thing is, say, if I wanted to do like another wet wash into there, obviously that's all dry. So if I went straight in and cut a wash, let's just do that. So I went a little bit of this kind of wash. I'm going to get like hard edges. I'm going to get a hard edge line there. So what you can do is, again, either with clean brush and clean water, you can either do this with the brush and you just need a really light touch, or some sort of spray. I've got these little atomizer sprays. These can be quite good. Sort of re-dampen that area. And then you should then be able to go in with some stronger colour. I'm going to make that too wet. And then sort of kind of get some more, and hopefully that will kind of mingle in with the panels that are there. So that's another thing you can. It's just something I'll sort of just play around with, and I don't know who'd shown me that or whether worked that out myself. I can't remember. So that's that one. I'll get rid of that one now. The other thing that I was kind of thinking to demonstrate this week is really just a range of different textures. So that was the demo from Tuesday. So it's just really playing around with the paint and just seeing where you can go with it. So this thing's over here. So the brushwork that I was using the other day was really wet washes, kind of wet and wet washes, and then just plain washes. Another type of wash you can go for is what they call a kind of dry brush work. So in that case, you want to just touch the paper, and this you really need a little bit of a texture to the paper. So this is like a medium texture paper. You can get papers a lot rougher than this that would work with this. This technique would work a lot better with a rougher paper. But just using a brush and just kind of just and so touching it, maybe using the side, I can get this kind of fragmented, rough-edged sort of texture. So that might work quite nicely with maybe a line of trees or something like that. If I didn't want like a really sharp mark like that, that's a way of creating texture. I could obviously go a lot lighter as well, so just a bit more water with that. The same sort of thing, just a quick kind of drag across. And that could be quite nice if maybe you've got a wash down of maybe like sand looking beach or something. You just want to drag a bit of paint over to give maybe the impression of sort of, I don't know, shells or something like that on the beach. And then obviously you can then kind of make, so, you know, this exercise is just playing with the paint, maybe make some little imaginary pictures out of it if you want to. It's hard not to sometimes, but it's not being too precious about what you're creating. So that's one way of creating a texture. Another way, which to be honest I've not used this an awful lot, but I have seen people do this, is to use a bit of sponge. So this is quite dry sponge. So again, you could experiment with just putting that one quite dry. You could kind of pre-dampen the sponge a little bit, see how that worked. The other thing you could do is pop down some wash and just lift off a little bit. So you could kind of use that to just soften that area out a little bit. So you haven't got completely solid. In some ways I kind of prefer that to that personally. There are all sorts of different brushes that they design to create textures. I actually find some of these soft care brushes quite nice because you get more of a random sort of look. Let's just get that a bit wetter. So this isn't one that you'd really be able to control a great deal, but you can get some nice sort of slightly more kind of random marks than a nylon brush like that. So it's nice to experiment with. Another texture that sometimes, again, I'm not using an awful lot of, but I've seen artists do this, is just kind of scratching through. So doing something like a foliage scene, something like that. So fingernail or a bit of credit card. That gives you some nice kind of scratches. And again, this might be quite nice in conjunction with other sorts of marks. So I'm not always that fond when the technique comes out first before the general impression of the picture. But they're all things that you can employ in your kind of arsenal of techniques. All good so far? Yep. When we covered watercolours last year, I think I did a short course, and I really focused very much on the basic washes and practicing basic washes. So that was good practice, but I thought it's nice to then look at other things that show and textures and things. I don't know if I mentioned masking fluid or not, but this is a way of, so with watercolour, you really want to keep the brightness of the paper. If you want that transparent watercolour look, so you can use masking fluid to really preserve the light of it, or masking fluid is one way of preserving the light of it. So what I tend to do is just get a really old brush. I tend to dampen it first, and apparently you can also use soap on your brush as well. But I dampen it first because they really dries up very quickly on the brush. And there's a couple here I lent out only in a week, and they come back nice and solid. But again, if I want to say some lighter bits, and the thing is, keep the brush nice and damp, and then as soon as you finish using it, you don't really need this too thick, it just needs to cover really. As soon as you finish using it, just pop it in the water. And I tend to keep one little pot for the masking fluid, the water, and one for paint, so that you're not introducing fluid into your paint. This particular one is a blue colour, which helps me to see it, and it's quite nice to be able to see it. Traditionally, they're like a cream colour, which is fine, and I think they may be a bit better quality than this one. The Winsor & Newton ones might be a bit better, but the cream one sometimes is a little more difficult to see it on the paper because you're then painting other colours that it's not mingling. Really important, let that completely dry. And I don't know if I've got any of that started earlier. No, I don't think so. There's one. Yeah, so that's a little bit I put down another occasion. So that's completely dry, and then just pop a wash over that. You have want that. And again, just got to let that completely dry. And once that's completely dry, I can then remove that, and that will keep the white of the paper. So that might be quite nice for, I could paint, if I had lots of clouds or something, that might be a good way of painting all the clouds in. It's going to give me a hard edge, but then I could use that technique I showed you before and just soften the edges out afterwards with a little bit of clean water. So
the mud or the mud and then.
Yeah, that'd be right, wouldn't it? Yeah, the little, ideal for that. I like some mud. Yeah. There's all sorts of things you can do. I think this is a little bit of oil pastel, sort of put down first and then paint over the top. This is using salt, so putting down a wash and popping a bit of salt in, and you get these sort of granular effects that might come in handy somewhere. Bit of bubble wrap. These are like flicking, so a
Do you
toothbrush.
use candle wax?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can't
Some way.
really see the wax on the paper.
Well, that's it. It's hard to see,
Yeah.
but it's quite nice actually. I quite like that was one of the ones I did with candle wax on Tuesday, and I quite like that because you get this slightly grainy, rough edge because it's picking up the texture of the paper. Obviously, once that's down, that's part of your painting, and you're not going to be able to put any other colour on top of that. So if you did want like another pale colour, you'd have to do that first and let it dry. But yeah, that works nice. It's very difficult to see. So this is just a little bit of tea light. And you really just got to guess where it is really. So yeah, that's really kind of wax. And I'll wash over there. I'll do it again. So that will form will release this like that, showing up nice and dark. So that's that comes out quite nice like that. If you've got obviously if you've got too much paint, you can then just pick up the dribbles. Ideally, you want your board slightly less angle. You don't want it steeper stick. Just a tiny bit of angle works nicely with watercolours. These little bits here I can lift out before it dries. And I don't know, it seems to have scratched. I think I must have scratched that. Maybe I don't know how come that. It's got a few scratches too. Don't know what that is. That's interesting. Unless that's just the paint. Maybe, oh, I'll tell you what I've got. I've got some dark black paint. Let's just go over that again. I think it's the colour I'm picking up. It's not quite mixed up with. Yeah, that's better. It's a bit more even. And then these bits here, I can just lift those out. You can probably do that when it's dry. Get those bits, little bubbles. That could be quite nice. Yeah, this, that's dry. Probably not quite dry enough, but once that's dry, I can then take that out. That was the one I did earlier in the week, and obviously, once you've got like the whites, if you needed to, you could put some very, if you wanted like some very pale colours in here, you could do that, or even a little bit. It sort of rather appears like a hole, really, doesn't it, in the painting? So sometimes you might need to just put some, shadows and just kind of bring that to life a little bit. There's loads of these you could kind of go into, but I think that's probably quite a good start if you want to just experiment and explore. And the other one that I was thinking to talk about was this works best with a toothbrush. Could I have a toothbrush then? Okay, so just doing that sort of thing, that can create quite a nice texture. The other thing you can do that sometimes I've seen artists do is working that into like a flat wash, so it slightly kind of breaks up the texture. Sort of kind of, that can be quite effective looking. And then there's also just actually just doing that. There's splattering and there's, I think one's called flicking, one's called splattering or something like that. I can't remember which one's it is, but there's different ways of kind of chucking the paint. So they're all sort of techniques I've seen different artists use that I think could come in handy. It's going to be, I think with all of them, lots of experimenting before you launch into something like a major project really. Very, very unforgiving, the watercolours. Next week I will talk, we could do like a sketchbook week, we'll bring the sketchbooks in. Even make that next week or the week after, I can't quite decide. I think maybe do that the week after. I think next week maybe we'll do a little bit on gouache and a little bit of line and wash, so kind of using pen lines and then watercolour. And then, yeah, I'll do the sketchbooks the last week. Is that okay? Yeah.